I'm going to start with our first reading. Comes from Mary Oliver. This is from the collection New and Selected Poems, Volume 2. The poem is called Yes, No, and those each have exclamation points after them. So they are meant to have some enthusiasm to them. Yes, no. How necessary it is to have opinions. I think the spotted trout lilies are satisfied, standing a few inches above the earth. I think serenity is not something you just find in the world like a plum tree holding up its white petals. The violets along the river are opening their blue faces like small dark lanterns. The green mosses, being so many, are as good as brawny. How important it is to walk along, not in haste, but slowly, looking at everything and calling out, yes, no. The swan, for all his pomp, his robes of glass and petals, wants only to be allowed to live on the nameless pond. The catbrier is without fault. The water thrushes down among the sloppy rocks are going crazy with happiness. Imagination is better than a sharp instrument. To pay attention, this is our endless and proper work. That is, again, Mary Oliver from, the poem is called Yes, No, from New and Selected Poems. And our Bible reading, the assigned Bible reading this morning comes, it's part of the series of stories of King David. It happens shortly after he is ascended to the kingship, and the assigned part of the story leaves out what is the most interesting and the most troubling part of the story. So I'm going to read that too, even though it makes the reading a little bit on the long side. This is 2 Samuel chapter 6, verses 1 to 19. And it involves the Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of God, which it was a physical object. If you ever saw the movie Raiders of the Lost Ark, you know it had particular power to it. It does in this story as well. It's a carved box, in essence, a carved wooden box with some some stone tablets in it, but invested with a great deal of power. Sacred things in the ancient world were considered to be powerful and sometimes very dangerous. So this is a story after the Philistines had captured the Ark of the Covenant and take it away. David and the warriors of Israel reclaim it. David called up the 30,000 chosen warriors of Israel. Then David and the whole force set out for Baalah in Judah to return the Ark of God, which bears the name of the Lord of hosts, who sits enthroned above the cherubim. The Ark of God was placed on a new cart and removed from the house of Abinadab, where it had been stashed, which is on a hill. Uzzah and Ahio, who are a couple of priests, they walked before it, while David and all the people of Israel danced before the Lord with all their might, with songs, harps, lyres, tambourines, castanets, and cymbals. This is the part that the assigned reading leaves out, because I think they want it happy, but this is part of the story as well. When they came to the threshing floor of Nacon, one of the oxen stumbled, and Uzzah reached out and took hold of the ark to steady it. The Lord's anger burned so hot against Uzzah because of this violation, touching the ark, that he was struck dead there beside the Ark of the Covenant. David was angry because the Lord had burst forth with this outburst upon Uzzah, so that to this day, that place is called Perez Uzzah, which means bursting out against Uzzah. So one thing I appreciate about the reading here is that we see somebody getting angry back at God, so angry that he gives a place name so that everyone will remember this is the place where God was petty. David was afraid of the Lord that day. And he said, "How can the ark of the Lord come into my care?" So David was unwilling to take the ark of the Lord into his care in the city of David. Instead, he took it to the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite. The ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom the Gittite for 3 months, and the Lord blessed Obed-Edom and all his household. When David heard that the Lord blessed the whole household of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God, David went and brought up the ark of God from the house of Obed-Edom to the city of David with rejoicing. So you wait till it seems safe again. When those who carried the ark of the Lord had gone 6 paces, he sacrificed an ox and a fatling. David was wearing a linen ephod. We'll say linen ephods didn't cover all that much. And he danced before the Lord with all his might. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of the trumpet. As the ark of the Lord came into the city of David, Michal, the daughter of Saul, that's the prior king and also the wife of David, she looked out of the window and saw King David leaping and dancing before the Lord, and she despised him in her heart. They brought in the ark of the Lord and set it in its place inside the tent that David had pitched for it. David offered burnt offerings, offerings of well-being before the Lord. When he finished offering the burnt offerings and the well-being offerings, he blessed the people in the name of God and distributed food among all the people so that all the men and women of Israel each got a cake of bread, a portion of meat, and a cake of raisins, and then all went back to their homes. This is the good news of God. It's a strange story, a troubling story, but it is a story at its heart that comes from an ancient world that maybe understands sacredness and holiness a little differently than we do. I think we tend not to see quite so much danger present in physical objects that are deemed sacred, but it gives us a moment, maybe it prompts us to ponder. So I will give you a moment here. See if you can bring to mind, can you bring to mind a time when you knew you were in the presence of something holy or sacred? Maybe it was an event, something that happened, a particular point in time that happened long ago that you've held with you, or something that happened recently. Maybe it's a ritual that you do, or some kind of object that holds deep and powerful memories for you. Maybe there is a special place that brings up this feeling of holiness for you. I wonder if you can call that to mind and think of the feelings and the sensations that go along with that event or that ritual or that object or that place. I'll let you sit with this for a moment and see what comes up for you. If anyone has one that they'd like to share as you think of it, I welcome you to unmute yourself and do that, or maybe we can leave a little space for it later as well. This morning we had somebody talk about being on a whale watching tour and seeing a baby whale breach right in front of her, and she was able to bend over and kiss it, which she said you're probably not supposed to do, but it was a powerful and holy moment for her. I'm going to talk about a recent one of these moments for myself. And again, maybe if you're inspired later, you can say something to us about it. Those of you who were here on Zoom last week will probably remember that I talked a little bit in the prayer time about a new documentary called Summer of Soul. Rhapsodized might be the term. I was gushing a little. It's about the Harlem Cultural Festival of 1969, which was the summer that a community organization sponsored several weeks worth of free concerts. It is sometimes called Black Woodstock because it happened in the same year as that other Woodstock. but it was almost entirely ignored because it didn't involve loads of young white people doing things their parents disapproved of. It did involve tens of thousands of Black and brown people gathering in public to celebrate community and joy and creativity and excellence. The performers covered a spectrum of musical styles. There was rock, pop, gospel, jazz, soul. All of it was professionally recorded on video, and then it was shelved away until now. If you haven't seen it already, I would highly recommend that you give yourself the gift of 2 hours to watch it. And I want to tell you about one scene in particular, which is not a spoiler because it's not the kind of movie that has spoilers, but it is something that I found very, very powerful. Many of you may know that I have a deep and abiding love for Mavis Staples. It's her voice, but not just her voice, her whole bearing. There is such longing and warmth and conviction in her voice. It draws me in every time. I started listening to her on the front end of her late career resurgence about a decade ago. She'll be back out on the road once things are open up a bit more. I'm sure she's, I think 81, 82, maybe even 83 by now. But I started listening about 10 years ago, and that led me to look backwards to her time in the Staples Singers, which was the family band led by her father, Pop Staples, who he'd started out with another group of musicians, but they were apparently terrible about ever showing up for practice. So he just quit them and pressed his children into service. The Staples Singers were one of the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s favorite musical groups. Pops had developed his own style of guitar playing, rooted in Southern blues, but he used it for gospel music. And they all had these amazing harmonies that they just locked in, singing songs of faith and struggle and resistance. There's a great story. This is a side note, but it's a good side note, I think. A great story in Mavis's biography about how in the early part of their career, they inspired gambling in churches when they were out on the church circuit after they put their first album out, because most people didn't know what they looked like yet, but they were captivated by Mavis's deep, rich voice. And so they started making bets before they were singing about which one was that singer. And most people put their money on Mavis's brother Purvis because he was the only man aside from Pops in the band. And so the family even played this up so that when it was almost time for Mavis's first solo, Purvis would step up to the microphone and all the people in the crowd would get these smug looks on their faces like, that's right, I'm about to win some money, until Purvis moved aside and Mavis stepped forward to sing. And then the whole air fell out of them until that voice started. That voice, Mavis's great inspiration, her greatest inspiration in her singing was Mahalia Jackson. Mahalia Jackson had more than earned her title as the Queen of Gospel by the time the Staples Singers started performing. In 1961, she became the first gospel singer to win a Grammy. In 1963, she was the one who helped bring new energy into Martin Luther King Jr.'s most famous speech on the Mall in Washington, when she called out to him, "Tell them about the dream, Martin." And in 1969, Mahalia Jackson was there at the Harlem Cultural Festival at the same time as the Staples Singers. She was the headliner the night that the Staples Singers performed. They warmed up the crowd for her. And then Mahalia came on to sing. She was well into her set when she walked to the back of the stage where the Staples Singers were still sitting down and watching, because why wouldn't you stay on the stage to watch Mahalia if you could? And she sat down next to Mavis and she said, "Baby, Haley don't feel too good. I need you to help me sing this song. I only ever read about this in Mavis Staples' biography. When the Queen of Gospel tells you she wants you to help her sing the next song, you just do it, even if she didn't tell you what the next song is going to be. But it's right there on video that had been buried for decades. Mahalia Jackson singing Precious Lord, Take My Hand, and Mavis Staples singing it with her. I reached out my hand to touch it, not so much to steady myself. It didn't strike me dead, but it sure did knock me on the floor with tears streaming down my cheeks like I'd just become Pentecostal. It was a powerful interpersonal moment. A younger star being legitimized by her idol. It was a moment of passing the torch, but it was so much more than that too. Mahalia had been singing that song for years. She had made it her own. And she had sung that song a year earlier at Martin Luther King Jr.'s funeral. And now she was singing it with Mavis Staples for a crowd of maybe 30,000 people gathered together for a festival where the police refused to provide security, so the Black Panthers did. That song held grief, and it held sorrow, it held rage, it also held assurance, it held conviction, it held resistance, it touched the deepest places of spirit, the deepest reservoirs of what it means to be human. It was, in a word, holy. It was sacred. And it moved me profoundly, even 50 years later, and just streaming it on Hulu. I can't really explain the depth of emotion that it provoked in me. And I won't try to say that it will or even that it should provoke the same kind of emotion in you. Sacredness speaks to us in different languages and using different means and different images. That's why I asked the question at the beginning about your own encounters with the sacred, the moments, the objects, the rituals, the places, the feelings. Maybe we can still hear about a couple of them, maybe in our prayers today. Or maybe you can just tell someone about them later. Whatever those are for you, whatever they look like for you, whatever they've been for you, the power of these encounters with the sacred, with the holy, I think, is this, that they remind us that we are small, but held in something vast. That they root us more deeply to this earth, this place, this life, that they connect us to the past as we move in the present, and that they call us into better versions of ourselves. So let's pay attention for them, wherever and whenever they might show up for us. Because paying attention, as Mary Oliver reminds us, is our endless and proper work. This is God's good news. Amen.